Tistou of the Green Thumbs by Maurice Druon. Chapter 8, in which Tistou has a bad dream, and what happens as a result of it. Certainly Tistou asked too many questions. He even went on asking them in his sleep. The night after his lesson on order, he had an appalling nightmare. Of course, dreams are only dreams, and their importance should not be exaggerated, but one can't stop oneself dreaming. So Tistou saw in his sleep his pony, Gymnast, his head shaved, walking round and round in a circle between high, dark walls, and behind him the roan thoroughbreds, their heads shaved too, dressed in striped clothes, wearily dragging their feet along in ridiculous boots. Suddenly, Gymnast, having first looked to the right and left to see that no one was watching him, made a dash for the gates and tried to jump over them. But he fell back on the iron spikes. His ridiculous boots beat the air, and he neighed in the most lamentable way. Tistou woke up with a start. His forehead was damp and his heart beating hard. Luckily it was only a dream, he said to himself very quickly. Gymnast is in the stables, and so are the thoroughbreds. But he couldn't go to sleep again. What would be so hard on horses must be even worse for men, he thought. Why should the poor prisoners be made to look so ugly? They won't become any the better for it. I know quite well that if I were shut up inside there, even if I had done nothing wrong before, I should most certainly become very wicked indeed. What can be done to make them less unhappy? He heard 11 o'clock and then midnight strike on the Mirepoix church clock, but he went on asking himself questions. And quite suddenly he had the glimmerings of an idea. Supposing the poor prisoners were surrounded with flowers. Order would be a less ugly thing, and perhaps the prisoners would become better. Supposing I tried my green thumbs, I'll suggest it to Mr. Turnbull. But then he thought that Mr. Turnbull would merely turn red in the face, and he remembered Moustache's advice not to speak of his green thumbs. I shall have to do it alone without anyone knowing. Once an idea has taken possession of one's mind, it becomes a resolve, and a resolve never leaves one in peace till it has been acted upon. Tistou felt that he could not go to sleep again till he had put his plan into execution. He got out of bed and searched for his slippers. One of them had hidden itself under the chest of drawers. But where was the other? The other was laughing at him, hanging from the window latch. That's what comes of throwing your slippers about. Tistou crept out of the room. The thick carpet deadened the sound of his steps. He silently reached the banisters and slid down them on his stomach. Outside the moon was full. The man in the moon was blowing out his cheeks with fresh air. On the whole, the moon is kind to people who go out into the night. Hardly had he seen Tistou crossing the lawn in his long white nightshirt than he polished up his face with a cloud that happened to be in reach of his hand. "If I don't watch over that boy," he said to himself, "he'll end up by falling into a ditch." The moon reappeared brighter than ever, and even sent a message to the stars of the Milky Way, asking them to twinkle as brightly as they could. Protected by the moon and the stars, Tistou, half walking, half running through the deserted streets, reached the prison without incident. He was a little bit nervous, of course. This was his first adventure. If only my green thumbs work properly, he thought. If only Moustache hasn't made a mistake. Tistou poked his thumbs wherever he could, into the earth, into the crack between the wall and the pavement, into the crevices between the stones, into the sockets of each prison bar. He worked very conscientiously. He didn't even neglect the keyhole of the entrance gate, or the sentry box where a guard was asleep. When he had finished, he went home and fell asleep at once. Indeed, Carolus had considerable difficulty in waking him in the morning. "Wake up, Tistou! Sunshine bright!" We have already mentioned the fact that Carolus spoke with a foreign accent. There was a question on the tip of Tistou's tongue, but he dared not ask it. All the same, he did not have to wait long to know the result of his experiment, for Goodness me, what had happened to the prison? If Mr. Turnbull had fired a big gun in the middle of Mirepoix Square, he couldn't have created more excitement. Imagine the bewilderment of the whole town at the spectacle of such a wonder. Imagine the astonishment of the people when they saw their prison transformed into a castle of flowers, into a palace of marvels. Before 10 o'clock, the whole town had heard the fabulous news. By midday, the whole population was gathered in front of the high wall, covered with roses, and the bars transformed into arbors. There was not a window in the prison, not a single bar, which had not received its share of flowers. Creepers climbed and hung down, while the horrid spikes on the walls had been replaced by cacti. The most odd sight of all was perhaps the sentry box over which honeysuckle had grown so thickly that the guard was imprisoned inside. The plants had used his rifle as a prop and had blocked the entrance. The astonished crowd gazed at the guard, who was calmly and resignedly smoking his pipe in the shelter of a bower. No one could explain the miracle. No one except, of course, Moustache, who came to have a look like everyone else, and then went off without a word. But that afternoon, when Tistou put on his straw hat for his second gardening lesson and went in search of him, Moustache greeted him with, "Oh, so there you are. Not bad. Not bad at all. For a start, you've done very well." Tistou felt rather embarrassed. "Without you, Mr. Moustache, I should never have known I had green thumbs," said Tistou, by way of rendering thanks. But Moustache did not like people to be effusive. All right, he said, but you've used too much honeysuckle. And you must beware of Aristolochia. It's a fast-growing creeper, but its leaves are dark. Next time use more morning glory. It'll add a note of gaiety." Thus Moustache became Tistou's secret adviser.